There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with my Aussie April TBR. Last year was the inaugural Aussie April, and it was organized by Jacqueline of 6 Minutes for Me, Ange of Beyond the Pages, and Doris of Aldi Books. I am very sure that at least Jacqueline of 6 Minutes for Me and Doris of Aldi Books are co-hosting it again this year. Regardless of what's happening or what's not happening, I am all in for Aussie April, whether that's formally or informally, and here is my TBR. My last few readathon TBRs, I have said I'm limiting myself to 6 books per readathon, and I think I'm still going to follow that. But I also would talk about my no more than 6 books at one time rule. Well, that rule has gone out the window, so who knows how many of these books I may end up reading in April, but I have quite a pile here. Pile of possibilities, as Cousin from Always Doing would put it, and here's what I'm hoping to read. And before I get to that, I did a Zoom chat with an Australian book blogger, James, of the book blog Caustic Cover Critic, in which he recommended 10 works of Australian fiction that maybe aren't that well known outside of Australia, from old to new, very diverse selection of novels and whatnot. So please check that out as you consider building your own TBR. One of those has made it onto mine, and I'm going to be mining it in detail for Aussie April 2022. Without further ado, here is what I've got for Aussie April 2021. I have 2 buddy reads this year, and the first one is the Australian classic My Brilliant Career by Miles Franklin. This will be a buddy read with Kim of Middle of the Book March. It's apparently quite a Marmite book. I think it was originally published at the end of the 19th century. Is that right? 1901. 120 years ago, and it is the story of a headstrong young girl, Sibylla, growing up around the same time in Australia. Most of my friends who have read it have liked it, so I hope that Kim and I do too. And the other buddy read for Aussie April is a fairly new book. I think it came out last year, and that is The Yield by an Indigenous Australian novelist, Tara June Winch, and I have heard such glowing reviews of it. I think the first one I saw was Jacqueline's, and it was a fabulous review, and that's how it got on my radar and onto my shelf. So it is about an Indigenous Australian woman who had been living in Europe for a decade and comes home to her rural Australian home and attempts to save her family's home and her ancestors' land. That's all I need to know about the plot, but I remember Jacqueline talked about how central language is. Tara June Winch is from the Wiradjuri nation or tribe, and a lot of their language is threaded through the book and absolutely central to the novel, and that just inflamed my imagination, so I am finally going to give this a try with Greg of Supposedly Fun. I don't think I've mentioned him yet. Yes, Greg of Supposedly Fun and I are buddy reading it. So those are my buddy reads. And here is the other books that I'm hoping to read in Aussie April. This is a short story collection. I got it online for really cheap. It was advertised as a new book, and I think it is new, but it's a little bit scuffed. But it is a short story collection by Elizabeth Harrower, who just sadly passed away in 2020. And this collection is called Stories. Yeah, it's just called Stories. She apparently was an extraordinary short story writer. She was born in Sydney in 1928. And like I say, she just passed away last year. Lived in London and began her writing career there, but at the time this book was published, which was 2015, she was living in Sydney. Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. On the spine it just says Stories, but if you look carefully at the cover, the title of this collection is A Few Days in the Country and Other Stories. I bought this because it was so cheap and it was short stories, and I didn't even know what nationality the writer was. I didn't know anything. And then shortly, a few months later, she died, and everybody on Bookish Twitter was mourning her death, so that put it on my radar all the more, and I'm going to be trying it next month. And this is a Blame It on Kim of Middle of the Book March pick. She liked this novel, and because of that, I ordered it. And it's an Australian novel, novella, A Loving, Faithful Animal by Josephine Rao. And now is it Rao or Rowe? I will find out later. Probably Rowe, Josephine Rowe. I remember she said she didn't love it, but she really liked it. But I had forgotten until after I got it in the mail that it's an Australian novel. Opens New Year's Eve 1990 in a small town in Southeast Australia, and the female protagonist's father, a Vietnam War vet, I didn't know until this moment that there were Australian Vietnam War vets, has disappeared, possibly for good, and there's all kinds of family dysfunction. And the author photo, she looks like quite an intense person, so that's all I need to know. This is a book that's been on my shelf for 5 years, more, maybe longer. It's now finally time to read it, because I've heard mixed reviews, but mostly positive, and most people that know me well say that they think it will be a Sean book, and that is The Slap by Christos Scholkas. He is a gay Greek-Australian novelist, and this has a fascinating premise. There is a neighborhood picnic. I may not have that right, but that's my memory. I don't like to read the synopsis, but what I've heard about it is it's like a neighborhood picnic, and a man disciplines through slapping a young male child, a boy, who is not his son, who he's not related to, and it causes a furor in the neighborhood, and that's the premise of the novel, which is pretty darn interesting. It's chunky. I mean, in this pocketbook, it's 450 pages, and it's small print, so I think it would be that long in a regular sized book as well. Quite a cover. I think it's been made into a movie or I don't know what, but I don't care about that. I just want to finally read the novel. I don't know that there's any overt queer themes in the book. I hope there are. But Scholkas has written some very homoerotic fiction that I haven't read yet either, but I'm going to start with this. And the sixth book that I am definitely planning to get to this Aussie April is Thelebs by Michael Mohammed Ahmad, a Lebanese-Australian writer, and this was also sold to me, I don't mean literally, but I mean figuratively, sold to me by Jacqueline's Review, and it is about a Lebanese-Australian family. My memory is that it's a story set in high school, that the protagonist is a high school student and facing all kinds of racial discrimination. Like all countries that are predominantly white, Australia is a horrifically racist place, and so those themes, and I speak as a Canadian, and we Canadians are as bad as anywhere else, that these themes really interest me. I'm glad the nipple's on this side so that I'm not touching it, because none of you will ever let me live it down. Looking forward to giving this a try. Those are my six. No, actually, there is a seventh, because it's an audiobook, so I'm going to waive my 6-book rule because it's an audiobook that is something that I can listen to and not take away reading time from the physical books. And this was sold to me, figuratively, from James of Caustic Cover Critic in the chat video I mentioned earlier. That is A Treacherous Country by K.M. Cromink. And it's an audiobook on Scribd, and in fact, as far as I could tell, I did a fairly deep dive on the internet. It's the only way anybody outside Australia can get it, unless you're willing to pay more than the book price for shipping from an Australian source. But it is an audiobook on Scribd, at least that's available to me here in Japan that way, so I'm going to give it a try. I previewed the audio and it sounded fine. Published, I think, just last year, won the Australian Vogel's Literary Award, which is an award for non-published manuscript, and it's one of the most lucrative, biggest literary prizes in Australia. I believe I'm remembering that correctly from what James said. Set in Tasmania, the author is a female Tasmanian writer. This is her debut novel, and it is set way back in history when I think Tasmania was known as Van Diemen's Land. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Once I listen to the audiobook, I will know. And it's kind of a quest pioneering type theme that is treated in a really unique and entertaining way. I believe that James thought it was one of the best novels to come out of Australia in quite some time. And the cover is inviting as well. So that is something I'm going to try on audio. So that's what I got. Plus, here, I'm a notorious bailer. I'm actually becoming less notorious, but I still bail fairly consistently. So I'm sure at least one of these will be a bail. So here are some alternates, some backups, here is the bottom end of the pile of possibilities. And if I don't get to any of these this year, I might read them later in this year. I don't have to limit my Australian reading to April, but there'll be strong candidates for next year. I don't remember who put the Australian novelist Kate Grenville on my radar. It might have been Jacqueline. I don't remember now, but I have this novel of hers, The Secret River. I haven't read anything by her, but this is supposed to be really good, and it's a historical novel set in the early 19th century. And it's about a man who was leading a very respectable life in London in 1806, but something happens and he gets convicted of a crime and sentenced to transportation to New South Wales, and that's how the novel opens. That sounds good to me, and whatever else I heard about it is what made me buy it, so I will get to it at some point. Similarly, this one keeps showing up as an alternate on several of my readathons for the last few years. This is Iwaki Kei's Farewell My Orange. So this is a novel by a Japanese-Australian writer. Kei, she went to Australia to study English and she ended up staying, and she's still there 20 years later at the time of publication. And this is translated from the Japanese by Meredith McKinney, and it is about immigrants to Australia. One is Japanese and the other is Nigerian. But I've heard nothing but good about it. It's a slim little novella. I might try to squeeze this one in too. I believe there's queer themes in it, and I could read it for the Asian readathon. I could read it for the queer readathon, Aussie April, but maybe it's finally time to get to it. And finally, this is a weighty, I don't know how, well, it's not that long, is it? I just think it's published on such beautifully heavy paper. It feels like it's a 600-page novel, but it's only 350 pages. A Richard Flanagan novel, First Person. It came out about 3 years ago, if memory serves. It's copyright 2017. My edition is 2018. And I haven't read anything by Flanagan, but his most famous Booker Prize winning novel is The Narrow Road to the Deep North. And whatever I heard about this made me want to buy it. I think I've done a page 112 on it. It's about a ghostwriter and a con man whose lives become intertwined. Probably I won't get to it this year, but it will be backup. So I'm so stoked for Aussie April, aren't you? Thanks for watching.